Hello there, XYZ. I don't know if there's going to be many around this evening. I did a live stream with Jay and Al Fadi there a few minutes ago, and I'm sort of high afterwards. A few minutes before we started the live stream, I was told, okay, you have a half an hour. And I thought, oh, I need longer. And they said, well, we can do 2 halves then. And so it was a bit rushed. Which is why I decided I'd do a fresh one here. So apologies if you've already seen the first one. Hello to Aquilum. How's it going? And yeah, so I decided to do a fresh one. I know there was a certain individual who was moaning in the chat about feeling that their material was robbed. So this is partly the reason. I'm not going to refer to him by name. You all know who I'm referring to. I don't know what his issue is, but none of the material that I used is from him. So don't know what he's talking about. It's not exactly material that only one person has come up with it. I've used Paul Ellis material, and I've used Odin. Hello to, is it Demi Jeji? Or Deme J, something like that. How's it going there? Yeah, so I've mentioned whose sources I've used, and as to my awareness, I'm not aware of using anyone else's material. Fingers crossed you can all see it. Okay, so this is actually a couple of pictures I've taken today. It's, for those of you from Ireland, you'll know straight away what it is. It's a place in Ireland called Glendalough. And it's a place where you can actually do an amazing circumambulation around 2 lakes. It's called Glendalough because it's the glen of 2 lakes. And I did this as a kind of like a preparation for what I'm talking about today, which is Safa and Marwa. And I had a really kind of spiritual experience going around today, and I can understand why people would do that. So we're going to be focusing on the Masjid, Al-Haram, the Hajj, and Safa and Marwa. Okay, I'll skip that one because I've already referred to it. And so I just want to focus on this for a second. So here are the people who I based this material on. In terms of the idea of Jerusalem, it was Odin's work, The Great Secret of Islam, that I based it entirely on. And then other ideas I had myself. It wasn't anyone else. And then the idea, like about 2 years ago, Paul Ellis was the first person really that exposed me to the idea of the Masjid Al-Haram is in Jerusalem. So that's a long time ago, 2 years ago. And you know, if you don't believe me, you can go back. So the person who's claiming that I got robbed their material, they're deluded. I didn't get it from them. Islam critiqued took some of these ideas, or at least it had an influence on me, and also A.J. Juice and Murad's work, and also work that I've done. This was from last year, and as you can see, I was already conscious of the connection with Jerusalem a year ago. So, sorry, you know who you are. I didn't take it from you. Sorry. So move on with your life. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, frozen there. Okay, so this is where the standard Islamic narrative says that the Masjid Al-Haram is, the Hajj is, Safa and Mecca, and so on. Okay. So A.J. Juice says the Quran neither commands a change from Jerusalem nor to Mecca, but instead to Al-Haram. Okay, so where did they get the idea? Because if you look at the Quran, Surah 2, you see that there's nothing really obvious there to suggest that, as it says here, there's a change from Jerusalem or to Mecca. There's nothing there to suggest that. It's purely an interpretation, which must have come from outside of the Quranic text itself. Now, so this is all work by Paul Ellis, and here he's basically just bringing together from the different Quranic verses all the things that it says about the Masjid Al-Haram. So it's a house. It's also referred to as my house. And we could make an argument that Umar is talking here, because Umar was the person who built a masjid on the Temple Mount. So this could be historically datable to the 630s, that particular part. So that's interesting. And we have support for that in this piece here that Murad brought to our attention a few months ago. It was Umar, Abu Turab, and Salman the Persian who composed your Quran. Furqan it says, but it would be Furqan, which would mean salvation. Okay. And then the Station of Abraham. So it's in the Quran, it says it's one of the places that Abraham lived. So what are the options? They are Ur, Haran, and that's where the 741 source might come into it. I think now, having looked at all the material I've been looking at in the past 2 weeks, I think they probably deduced that Mecca was between the first two stations of Abraham, Ur and Haran, and that's where we get that 741. It's not particularly helpful. There doesn't seem to be anything in terms of a location that fits. There's a tradition that puts it in Edessa. And if you don't believe me, you'll see videos online where Turks to this day are welcoming tourists to Abraham's birthplace. And then we have also, in the Islamic tradition, the idea of Abraham being taken up by a flying horse from Armenia, which also could be, that would be another option. So that's two options there in terms of Ur being west of Haran and Ur being east of Haran. No problem. But I think we can throw that out when we look at the earlier sources. I think they've made a mistake there. And they probably got the idea from the Station of Abraham, which is in the text itself. So that's, I think, the way I would resolve it. It looked promising, but there was no support elsewhere for that really northerly location. The other option is perhaps it's got to do with Umar living in Edessa. Murad mentioned that Umar lived in Edessa. That was where he ruled. So maybe that's the origin of the idea, but I don't know. So I think that is a bit of a dead end. The ancient house, that would suggest that it's been around for a long time. So if we're talking about Mecca and Mecca starting in the 8th century, then that doesn't fit. Sacred house, the Kaaba, the cube. Now the interesting thing, Kaaba itself in Mecca is not a cube. If you look at the dimensions, it doesn't actually match the idea of it being a cube. It's something like 12 meters by 11 meters or something around those lines at the end of the base, whatever it is in the height. So that's not actually, the Kaaba is not a Kaaba, or it's not a cube. So it's a bit of an irony. But anyway, so that's another thing in the Quran. The first house created for mankind, the Baca. Abraham and Ishmael were raising the foundations of the house. Interestingly, Abraham settled some of his progeny there. Where did the Jews settle? They settled in Israel, obviously. So his children settled there. They didn't settle way down in the Hijaz. Okay, so that wouldn't really fit the Hijaz. It's a pilgrimage place. It says, do not shave your heads until the offering reaches the place of sacrifice. Now, there's two things I want you to focus on. Offering and a place of sacrifice. So we can know already the Temple Mount was originally a place of sacrifice, but what about the offering? And then the new moon is a marker for the Hajj. Well, that's idea of marking the time of the new moon. It started in Babylon. Jewish people picked up on that when they were in Babylon from 600 BC, sorry. And so we can see a Jewish connection there with that as well. And this here is kind of curious. No harm in the rituals of Safa and Marwa. Why are the rituals of Safa and Marwa harmful? Is it just simply because walking between these two places is a bit dangerous? Or is it because they are using rituals from a previous existing religion, perhaps? Or maybe they're using rituals that the rabbinical Jews are using. Maybe could be that. A number of reasons. And it says, "And remember when we assigned for Abraham the place of the house, ascribe unto me no partners, and purify my house for those who circumambulate it, and those who stand, and those who bow and prostrate." So it's a place that is circumambulated, where people go around it. Now, why does Mecca not fulfill this description? There's no sign of its existence before the year 700, so how can it be the ancient house? Why would Hagar and Ishmael go 600 miles from Canaan to an arid desert 600 miles south, i.e. Mecca in the Hijaz? So that doesn't work. The Bible is clear about where Abraham sends out Hagar. It's just south of Beersheba into the desert of Sin and then on to Paran. Okay, so it's in the wrong location. There's no biblical link between the places of Safa and Marwa and the story of Hagar and Ishmael looking for water in the desert. I challenge you to look in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, and you can have a look where the story of Hagar and Ishmael appears. There's no mention of Safa and Marwa in the text. So why did they link them? Safa and Marwa in Mecca are not hills. You could climb them without much effort. I think you could probably nearly jump to the top of them in 2-3 leaps. A child could easily climb them. They're basically just boulders. And the floor between both boulders is flat. When I was walking out today, climbing the hills and going down the hills and realizing how difficult it was, I was envying the idea of walking in air conditioning on a flat floor between Safa and Marwa. It's just ridiculous. Mecca and Makkah are completely different words. Okay, so why can we link Masjid al-Haram with the Masjid on the Temple Mount? Reason one is the link with Abraham. Genesis refers to Abraham building an altar on Mount Moriah to sacrifice Isaac upon. And in Arabic, Moriah is pronounced Marwa. So there's a straightforward link. It says, "Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Marwa, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Well, Marwa is not a mountain in the Hijaz, but it is in Jerusalem. Now, just a quick aside, in the year 2004, they were doing some sewage works. They were digging the ground in the southern part of Jerusalem, and they discovered a step underneath the soil, and they called the archaeologist, and lo and behold, they found steps into the pool of Siloam. And I don't know if it was before or after this, but they also found the ancient walkway, the pilgrimage walkway, from there all the way up to the top of the Temple Mount. And it was beautifully done back then, with white stones, big blocks of stone. It wasn't the yellow brick road, but the white brick road. And it's basically like stairs all the way up to the Temple Mount. And of course, the Romans knocked the buildings around there over it, and it was hidden for nearly 2,000 years. So it's interesting that when they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Notice there was wood nearby. Now, you'd find wood in a lot of places in the Fertile Crescent, including Jerusalem. So that fits. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Okay. Now, I'll skip this bit. I mentioned it during the live stream. I won't go into it again. You can have a look at it there yourself. If we move on to this, the Temple Mount is where Solomon built the first temple. Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, on Mount Marwa, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, the place provided by David. Now, if you look closely in the picture at the back, in the cutaway, you'll see the Holy of Holies, which is a cube. And in the time of Herod, there was curtains on front of it. And I should say also that the high priest went in there to sprinkle blood on the day of Yom Kippur, and he had little bells on him, so that and he had a rope tied around his waist because only he could enter. And if he were to die in there, the people outside would drag him out by the rope. And it's interesting, in the foundations under the Temple Mount, they actually found one of the bells that the high priest had. It's a tiny little gold bauble that they found, which is amazing that they found it underneath. So obviously fell off him at some stage. Now, so reason 2, the Kaaba is a cube. As you can see, the tabernacle in the wilderness, okay, you can see it's long and rectangular, but at the end of it was a section, a cubic room, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And this tabernacle was moving. So they could up sticks and rebuild the tabernacle wherever they wanted. So the idea of a moving location for the Shekinah, God's presence, comes from there. If you look at the picture on the right, you can see that there was curtains on the front, and behind it was the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, the Ark of the Covenant, for those who are not aware, is basically the tablets of stone with the 10 Commandments written or inscribed on. Okay. Now, there's different references to its dimensions. So Chronicles talks about it being 20 cubits long and the width of the building, across the width of the building, and 20 cubits high. It's not quite three-dimensional there. It's 2 dimensions given. But if we look at Kings, it gives us 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 high. So it's definitely a cube, so therefore a Kaaba. So that's the original Kaaba, I would suggest. And then third reason is Hajj, the pilgrimage. Okay, so the Jews, as you can see at the top source from Deuteronomy, had 3 festivals in particular: the Festival of Unleavened Bread, the Festival of Weeks, Festival of Tabernacles. And it says each of you must bring a gift. Do you remember we saw that in the Quran? It says you must bring an offering. There's a connection. Now, it's called Hag in Hebrew, but when you convert that to Arabic, it's pretty obvious, Hajj. That's where it comes from. Now, if we look at the Festival of Unleavened Bread, they sacrifice a goat during that, and Eid al-Adha has the same thing. Now, Odin points out that HJJ, Hajj, the only etymology in Arabic is to argue, so that's clearly not where it comes from. It has to come from the Hebrew. And the person who makes the pilgrimage called Hagag, and we can see how that connects with Al-Hajjaj. So there's obviously a Jewish connection there. It's pretty obvious, I think. And yeah, so that point. And also, in the Mishnah, it says that they are to circle the temple 7 times on the 7th day. So here you have the circumambulation 7 times, same thing as done in the Hijaz. So obviously they've copied from here. Reason 4, okay, it's referred to as the house of God. So look at it here, Ezra 1:5. Then the family heads of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and Levites, everyone whose heart God had moved, prepared to go up and build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. And if we look at Luke, it says, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. There's literally dozens and dozens of references we could use. And you can look at Paul Ellis's video for full selection. Okay, so there is another reason. House of God relates to the Temple Mount. Now, this one, Baka. Okay, it's an obvious one. You've seen it all before. The first house created for mankind at Baka. This passage in Psalm 84 suggests very much the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Where do you find the courts? You have the courts in the Temple Mount. So you have the courts of the women, the courts of the Israelites, etc. That's where you find the altar, where they did the sacrifices. It is also the house. It says, blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. So it's all about that pilgrimage that Hajj, that Hajj to Jerusalem. Okay, and reason 6, circumambulation. Well, the Dome of the Rock, when it was built in the 690s, has that in place. It's built for the circumambulation of that central holy rock, which is believed by Jews to be the place where Abraham attempted to sacrifice Isaac. Now, reason 7, it's to do with the Safa and Marwa. Okay, so this is an image. I'm giving credit to Odin. This is where I got the material from. You see Marwa and Safa, Kaaba there next to it. They circumambulate between those two places, but there's no history prior to the 8th century of these places, and no biblical support either. Okay, you can see the images there. They don't look very high. I think I could climb that one quite handily. I'm not a great climber, so not much of a hill. So there's an anomaly there. They've obviously tried to make this sound like it's a hill, and they've covered it up with a building, so it's not obvious to people that it's not a hill. And between those two places is basically a flat floor, so not much of a hill. Now, if we look at Jerusalem, it looks more promising. Now, you may not gather from this picture, but there's hills there. It looks flat, but actually there's a valley in the middle, and there's hills on either side. There's Mount of Olives, where Jesus prayed. Here's Mount Moriah, or Marwa in Arabic. Okay. There we have Mount Scopus, which is Mount Safa, according to Flavius Josephus. And we have the Kedron Valley in between. And this is the place where the apocalypse is meant to occur. Now, interestingly, the Kedron Valley is also called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Okay, but that doesn't seem to be mentioned in the Quran. But what is mentioned, according to Paul Ellis, is the Valley of Gehenna, which is mentioned as Jahannam 77 times, sometimes as Jaheen, together 101 times. Okay, where is that? Okay, there's Kidron Valley, the one that's in green. But here is Hinnom. So if you look at the short version, Jaheen, you can see Hinnom. These are variations on Hinnom. Jahannam, Jaheen. Okay, hope that's pretty obvious. Okay, so 101 times, that place circled on the left there is mentioned in the Quran. So that's really strong evidence that we're talking about the Temple Mount and not Mecca. Okay, and let's get rid of something out of my way here. Okay, now. Okay, so this is something I kind of rushed during the live stream with Al-Fadi, but the walk between Safa and Marwa in Jerusalem has got huge significance. So this is from the Islamic tradition. You can see here, Rock of Jerusalem is one of the rocks of paradise. Big deal, isn't it? You are my lowest throne, and from you I ascended into heaven, and below you the earth is extended, and all the water that flows from the tops of the mountains comes from below you. So it's essentially saying Jerusalem is the center of everything. And then Jerusalem is a land which Allah has chosen from among the other lands. And then God will destroy Gog and Magog in Jerusalem. Now, if we go back to the previous slide just to see the map again. Just go back to it. So down here, see if I can get the right location here. This is the eastern side. This is the western side. This is the northern side. And this is the southern side. Okay. This eastern side is the eastern gate, obviously. This is where the Messiah is meant to return and go through the gate. Okay. So Muslims believe that Al-Dajjal, the Antichrist, the false Messiah, would enter through these gates. So they closed these gates in the 9th century, and the Crusaders opened them again in the 11th, 12th century. The Ottomans closed it again, and they put a graveyard on front of the gate to basically to what's the opposite of purify? To spoil their sacredness, or to make it impossible for the Dajjal to enter that way. Okay. Now, if we look where the arrow is pointing down here, the Kidron Valley, you'll find the pool of Siloam way off picture. Okay, now let's just move on. So we've seen that. So this Hajj was centered on the apocalypse. I think that's the big takeaway from all of this. Okay, so how is it looking? So forbidden place of prostration. Yep. The inner sanctuary was forbidden to Gentiles 2,000 years ago. And also in the 7th century, Arabs were blocked by Jews in 614. So therefore, it's the forbidden place for prostration. So that's a check. God's house. Well, so yes, the temple is often called God's house. So that works. Cube. Holy of Holies was cubic. Unfortunately, the Kaaba in Mecca isn't cubic. So therefore, this one fits better. First house at Becca. Well, we saw the connection. It's symbolic of pilgrimage to Jerusalem according to Psalm 84. So it fits here better than with Mecca. Foundations raised by Abraham and Ishmael. Now, obviously, it says Ishmael because they've changed it from Isaac to Ishmael. But the temple was built on Mount Moriah, where Abraham built an altar to sacrifice Isaac. So, okay, the foundations raised is a reference to Abraham building the altar. Okay. Now, Abraham settled his progeny nearby. That's pretty obvious. That's where the Jews started. Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish nation. Hajj pilgrimage destination. The 3 Hajj feasts were celebrated there. Animal sacrifice, we've seen that. Okay. Ambulation, that's obvious. That was correct. In Marwa and Safa, we've seen that those 2 hills in Jerusalem were called Marwa and Safa for at least 2,000 years each. So that's really strong evidence, isn't it? Now, so Umar's entry into Jerusalem, 636, 637. Okay, so the first masjid that was built by Umar. Okay, and here we have John Moscusk, the Patrum Spiritual, the spiritual meadow from the 7th century, and in the appendix, narratives 18 and 19. What does it say? It says the godless Saracens entered the holy city of Christ our Lord, Jerusalem, with the permission of God and in punishment for our negligence, which is considerable, and immediately proceeded in haste to the place which is called the capital. They took with them men, some by force, others by their own will, in order to clean that place and to build that cursed thing intended for their prayer, and which they call a masjid. And Sophronius excommunicated an archdeacon who cooperated in building that. Okay. And then the monk Anastasia mentions there was more work happening in 660, and this is from Robert Hoyland. Robert Hoyland explains that there was an earthquake the year before. The original Masjid of Umar obviously was damaged, and that's why they had to clear it again and rebuild it. Okay, so Muawiyah had to build another one. Okay. Now, in 670, Muawiyah's masjid was seen by a French bishop, and he describes it as a rectangular house of prayer, which they have built in a crude manner, constructing it with raised planks and large beams over some remains of ruins. This house can, as it is said, accommodate at least 3,000 people. So, judging from the description there, I think it's fair to say it's been built like the ancient tabernacle in the desert. Okay, so that was the shape in the year 670. Abd al-Malik decided that, no, we're going to do something more magnificent. Okay. Now, so what about the Hajj? Okay, so we have a mixture of circumstantial evidence and direct evidence that Abd al-Malik started a Hajj in Jerusalem. Okay, what is the evidence? Okay, so there's lots of milestones. He repaired roads connecting his capital, Damascus, to Jerusalem, and linking Jerusalem to its eastern and western hinterlands. The roadworks are evidenced by 7 milestones found throughout the region, the oldest of which dates to May 692, the latest to September 704. So that's over most of his reign. The milestones, all containing inscriptions crediting Abd al-Malik, were found from north to south in or near Fiqh, Samak, St. George's Monastery of Wadi Kelt, Khan al-Rura, Bab al-Wad, and Abu Ghosh. And I was able to identify some of those locations there on the map. Those are the ones with the red stars. Okay, Jerusalem's there. Okay, so it's circumstantial. It doesn't prove there was a Hajj there, but it certainly shows that Jerusalem was important. Why were they straightening the roads? Why were they making these milestones towards Jerusalem? Now, here's one example. Basmala, there's no God but Allah alone. He is no companion. Muhammad is a messenger of Allah. May Allah bless him and give him peace. You can see they're promoting Muhammad now. Has ordered the repair of this road and the construction of the milestones. The servant of Allah, Abd al-Malik, the commander of the faithful, may Allah's mercy be upon him. From Damascus to this milestone, there are 109 miles. Okay. So again, this is circumstantial. And then there's this one. Again, it's just talking about the straightening of a mountain road. Then here we come to the direct evidence. So Abd al-Malik's nephew, who's living in Egypt, he writes to a governor and says, hey, let's go on a Hajj. Now, this parchment is dated between 707 and 717 for various reasons. I'm suggesting that they traveled to Jerusalem. This is where he was talking about. Okay. So this is the earliest reference to a Hajj of any kind on papyrus. Okay. Bear in mind there's an earlier reference to a Hajj, and that's in 702. So, you know, I think this is pretty strong evidence that this Hajj is relatively new. So it's during the period of Abd al-Malik, I would suggest. So here is what it says. He writes, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, from Sal bin Abdul Aziz to Uqba bin Muslim. Peace be upon you, and I thank for your sake God, besides whom there is no God but he. Now then, I have mentioned the pilgrimage Hajj. Now, why does he mention it? Well, I would suggest that this is something new. The commander of the believers has proclaimed it. Okay, so this definitely would suggest it's something new. So he's proclaimed this Hajj to the people, and he has exhorted them to it. So if you're able to go out with me, then do it, or do so. For if you want to do this, God willing. So he says, you know, if you want to, it's voluntary, but I'm going if you want to come along. Go out to me with my riding camels, and do not oblige yourself to anything besides the rental costs of a camel. So he's saying, come on with me, but I'm going to charge you for renting a camel. Peace be upon you and the mercy of God. So I would suggest that this can't be too long, or it's unlikely that he could persuade someone to go all the way down to the Hijaz. All right. Now I would suggest that the commander of the believers must be Abd al-Malik and not Walid, simply because the Hajj had already started at least as late as 701, 702, because we have the rock inscription. So I would suggest the person he's saying that has proclaimed it and exhorted it is his uncle. Kind of makes logical sense. Right? And just bear in mind, he's at this very time, Abd al-Malik is straightening the roads to Jerusalem and adding milestones. So all of this together, collectively, would suggest that the Hajj is towards Jerusalem. And then we have this here from 697, 698. northwest of Taif, a rock inscription proclaiming the building of the Masjid al-Haram. Now, there's a problem with it because there's a message on it. It doesn't match up with the rock inscription in the Dome of the Rock. So the Dome of the Rock says 72, the other one says 78. So I think it might be to do with when it was founded and when it was completed. I think that's the reason for the mismatch. The same thing with the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Okay, is it built? No, it's not complete yet. It started in 1882. I don't know how long more it's going to take for them to finish. So you see the issue. When do you say a building is built? Is it when it's finished or when it started or whatever? You know, it could be that the 692 date for the building of it might be just the inner part. Maybe the 6 years later they built an outer part. Who knows? But just one possible explanation. What's also interesting is Abdul Malik's full name, Ibn Marwan, might suggest son of Moriah, son of Marwa, son of the Temple Mount, and then Al-Hajjaj, he's a right-hand man. Hagag, Hebrew, means a pilgrim to Jerusalem. Again, I think that's too much of a coincidence. I think that points very much to Jerusalem. And on to the Zamzam. Okay, what about the Zamzam well? Okay, so the word Zamzam, I haven't confirmed this with anyone else. Leon Perez said this to me about 2 years ago. In Hebrew, it relates to the sounds the water makes, the gurgling of water. Okay, so the Zamzam well is a well that makes a noise. And we have a 570 AD source from a pilgrim from Italy to Jerusalem. And it was in the middle of this when he's talking about the altar of Abraham, and he says that on the altar is a crack, and when you put your ear on it, you hear the sound of running water. Zimzum, there we go. He also says that if you toss an apple onto it, I think he means into it, or anything which will float, and you go to the spring of Siloam, which is way down the hill, you'll find it there. Okay. Now, this actually turns out to be correct because there are drainage points underneath the Temple Mount that do go down there. There's lots of different ones. There's some that I believe were used for blood spillages. There's some that was being used for drinking water and so on. Okay, I don't think they would have had the drain for the blood going into the spring of Siloam. So he may not have been fully correct, but he definitely would have heard the local story that you're hearing the running water underneath. He might have tried it out as well, or he might have just heard people say that. So I would suggest that this would be a good explanation for the Zamzam connected to the Masjid al-Haram. Okay. Now, Charles Wilson and Charles Warren did a survey of Jerusalem in 1864. Queen Victoria told them to do it. I think they were sent to look for treasure, and they did a particularly good survey. They looked underneath and above. I don't think they discovered everything at that point, but they discovered quite a bit. And they discovered that there are lots of cisterns underneath, and they found underground walkways and so on, and the runways for the water. Now, the water, if you just look to, say, I don't know if you can see this, but this, from my memory's sake, the Gihon spring was up here, somewhere up here, and they brought the water from there underneath, and then it would flow way down here somewhere to the pool of Siloam. The idea being is that if the city of Jerusalem was ever under siege, they'd have access to the water. Clever guys. Okay, and so there is a description. And there's a support for the idea of a hole on the altar of Abraham that you could possibly hear the gurgling of water below. It says beneath the sacra is that central part where you have the rock, okay? The rock of Abraham where the altar is, okay? It says there is a cave beneath the sacra. There is a cave which is entered by descending some steps on the southeast side. The cave itself is about 9 feet high in the highest part and 22 feet 6 inches square. A hole has been cut through from the upper surface of the rock into the chamber beneath. Okay, so there's a hole from above the altar down in. So I think that confirms the pilgrims' idea. And then it says, and there is a corresponding hole immediately under it, which leads to a drain down to the valley of Kidron. Okay, so I think that fits with what the pilgrim said. It said this hole is supposed to have been made for the purpose of carrying off the blood of the animals sacrificed on the rock when it was the altar of burnt offerings to the temple. So presumably he would have heard the water flowing through. So the idea was that the blood would flow from the altar down into this passage below, and then the water would take it away. No, so that's that point there. And here's the Pool of Siloam, which was discovered in 2004, which I think I've already mentioned. And from there, they discovered a walkway all the way up to the Temple Mount on these white blocks of stone. So that was called the pilgrimage road. Okay, so I'm just going to suggest that the Hajj that Abdul al-Malik had started from here and went up to the Temple Mount and then across to Mount Safa. So you had Marwa and Safa. Now, in this location, the Jews had a festival of tabernacles, and they had a ceremony of the drawing of the water at this pool, and they sang psalms, and they made the messianic greeting, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," which obviously fits with the idea of Muhammad, the praised one. So you can see a connection there. At this ceremony, Jesus had said, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink," and so on. And then if we look at the bottom part, the pouring out of the water in the ceremony was looking forward to the time when God would pour out the Holy Spirit upon the nation. Okay, so if you're not following this, there's the Kidron Valley. You can see Gethsemane down here. I don't know if you can see that. That's where Jesus prayed. The Mount of Olives is here. The Pool of Siloam is there, and we have the Hinnom Valley, which is mentioned 101 times in the Quran. Okay, pretty solid stuff there, I think. Now, another supporting piece of evidence is from the Talmud. It says the Pool of Siloam was the starting point for pilgrims who made the annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and where they ascended by foot to the inner court of the Temple Mount to bring their sacrificial offerings. Now, you remember back the Quran mentions about bringing offerings, so there's another connection. We can now see how Marwa and Safa somehow became linked to Hagar's search for water. This Jerusalem Hajj started at the Pool of Siloam, hence the water. They went up to Moriah or Marwa, and on to Scopus or Safa, and then around again, hence the circumambulation. And they went through the valley of Kedron, which is meant to be the location of the apocalypse, when the Messiah would return and when God would judge his people. Okay. Now this, I should correct, it should be 7:30s. That was a little silly mistake. Okay, so John of Damascus in the 730s suggests the following. He says, "They furthermore accuse us of being idolaters because we venerate the cross which they abominate. And we answered them, how is it then that you rub yourself against a stone in your Kaaba," notice your Kaaba, "and kiss and embrace it? And some of them say Abraham had relations with Hagar upon it, and others that he tied up the camel around it when about to sacrifice Isaac." And we respond to them, "Scripture says that there was a mountain like a grove, and wood from which also Abraham cut for the whole burnt offering, on which he laid Isaac, and that he left the donkeys with the servants. Therefore, from what source is your foolish saying? For there is no wood of a forest lying in that place, nor traveling by donkeys." So I think it's pretty clear Mecca in the Hijaz has started by the 730s, because that's a place where there is no wood and there's no traveling by donkeys. The Bible says that there were donkeys, but they have changed it and have a camel being tied to it. So you can see that he realizes that they're messing around with the biblical story, and they've changed the location. Now, in relation to the 741 source that we have that says Mecca is between Ur and Haran, I'm going to suggest that because this is earlier, I think this trumps the later source. I think in retrospect, I think that source must have deduced that location of Mecca up there just simply on the idea that the Quran says that it was a station of Abraham, and they just said, well, he was born in Ur, he moved to Haran, so station of Abraham must be somewhere in between. I think that's all there is to it. Could be wrong, but there is no other evidence for Mecca up there. So I think, having looked at all of this stuff to do with Jerusalem, I think that's where I'd be leaning towards now. And interestingly, we have this source from 865, the Kitab Akbar Makkah, Book of Reports, and they said that 2 pious mosaic inscriptions commemorating al-Mansur, the founder of Baghdad, who enlarged and decorated the area, referring to Mecca, executed in black on a gold ground. The first house appointed to me was the one at Mecca. Quran 396 is one of 2 inscriptions. So interestingly, in this new place of Mecca, they're trying to claim that it links with Mecca, the first house. So they're trying to overrule the Jerusalem idea and rewrite history. So this is clearly obvious evidence that they're trying to rewrite history. And I find this interesting. This is obviously meant to be a picture of Mecca. Now, this is a picture that was done in the 18th century, so this is much later. So this it's a nice image. But it looks like, to me, a pint of beer. Just thought I'd say that. Maybe a pint of Guinness there. Okay. And then in 762, it's interesting that when Mansur built a new city, it was originally called Madinat al-Salam, City of Peace. And of course, Jerusalem is the original City of Peace or Town of Peace. I would suggest that he's obviously trying to replace the old Jerusalem with a new Jerusalem. Now, there was an old village called Baghdad in that location, so need to bear that in mind. But eventually, the old name overtook this name of City of Peace, and that stuck. So that's it. And that's an image I've taken from Odin's work of Baghdad. And as you can see, the whole circumambulation is really being demonstrated here. But actually, I think that is that idea of a round city isn't from that. It comes from Iran, if I remember correctly. Now, let's get back to you. Right. So how's it going, everyone? I thought I'd bring you up to speed there. Any thoughts? No. Point here from, isn't the pool of Siloam part of Hezekiah's water system? I believe so. It's if I remember correctly, I remember reading that some of the tunnels were built in 800 BC. So would that fit with Hezekiah? I think so. Yeah. Okay, let me see what else. Look at some more recent points. Right. Question: was Abd al-Malik an Arab? I would suggest he's probably a Persian, but I think we can be loose about that one because the Persian Empire crossed into Iraq, so he could have been like an Iraqi of some kind. I think that's probably where he was from. No, that's Paul Ellis, the man himself. I'm not aware of circumambulation in the Bible, but Abraham circles his altar 7 times in the book of Jubilees. Okay, good point there. But if you circle something, that's sort of circumambulation, I would suggest. Maybe they brought it to the next level. Okay, that's Paul there again. Paul Anker says, does Kaaba mean cube in Arabic? So I believe. So I believe. Oh, is Odin in the house? I see someone mention Odin. Fabulous. Odin deserves a lot of credit there. Cheers, Mel. Keep up the good work. So, yeah, Odin is the source for a good, I suppose, half of the material, really. Particularly the map that you produced showing where Safa and Marwa is. That blew my mind when I saw that. And so a certain individual is claiming that it was him who told me all about Safa and Marwa, when in fact it was your book and your presentation where I learned all of this from. But what you're saying here, there, the Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, became a symbol for hell. Yes, yeah. So you got all the drama there. You have the place of the apocalypse, and then next to it, you have the place that's symbolic of hell. No. So seeing Gehenna in the Quran does not mean automatically Jerusalem. Oh, I see your point. Yeah, that's true. It could be used literally or symbolically. That's true. But I suppose if we take all the other things into account, I think it's not too far of a stretch to suggest that it's influenced by that. No. So masjids were what originally? Replicas of the most holy or pagan prayer rooms? I would suggest that there's nothing particularly pagan about those original masjids. They were imitating Jewish customs. I would think. That's my take. I think where all the paganism came in was later, in the 8th and 9th century, when, I suppose, through mixing with others from different cultures. Though, having said that, I suppose I'm going to contradict myself. If you look at the sources from centuries before that, Arabs had a tendency of alternating between Judaism and paganism. Sometimes they were trying to be more Jewish than the Jewish, and then other times they kind of slacked off and became very pagan. So it's hard to know really what they were thinking. I'm humbled by the minds here, praise God. Well, I'm just probably the weakest link here in all of this, to be honest with you. If it weren't for people like Paul and Odin, I don't think I would have been able to bring it all together. So there were Christian masjids, yeah. And actually, if you look at the way Arab Christians have prayed in the monasteries as well, you can see that they're doing the same sort of prostrations, exactly the same as Muslims did. So we could see a strong parallel there. Okay. Okay, here's a good one. And hello to Father Brian as well. Hi, Snickopedians. Mel, what about the Kaaba being full of idols in Jerusalem? This bit doesn't seem to match. No, I think Elag, I can hardly say his name, Elagabalus, who Sam mentioned recently, is probably the source for that idea. I think that got mixed up in the rewriting of the narrative. I think it is a siphon system linked to the sheep pool where the waters were disturbed. Yeah. So one of the things I mentioned earlier on, the earlier live stream, is that I used to work in an abattoir when I was a teenager, and they used to kill about 4,000 sheep a day. I think in the time I spent there was 2 summers. I think I witnessed the unfortunate deaths of about 200,000 sheep. And my job was basically brushing up the blood and putting it down the hole. So I'm really conscious of that aspect of the story. So if you imagine there were 1 million people visiting Jerusalem for Passover, I think there might be even more than that, maybe 1 to 2 million, but let's just say 1 million. And they were told to sacrifice 1 lamb for every 10 people. That's a lot of lambs. That's like 100,000. That's an incredible amount of blood. So you can imagine these drainage points would have been key, because otherwise you just have literally a lake of blood on the top of the Temple Mount if they didn't have a system to get rid of the blood. Now, a link here to the Gospels is the piercing of Jesus' side, and the blood and water came out, because the Jewish custom was that they kept the heart going as long as possible to get as much of the blood out of the lamb as part of the sacrifice. And this month is a month dedicated to the Sacred Heart, so there's a lot of links going on here. And I love the idea that the Zamzam, or the Zamzam hole, is another hole in the narrative. I love that. Let me just see more recent points. Okay, let me go to the most recent. Okay, let's hear this one. The Jerusalem Kaaba was under associationist rule, hence the Qurans need to purify it, and so the Sirah was written to match both the Quranic text and the Sen. Very good. No. Hello to... no, wrong one. Let me just try to show you this one. No. Maybe it's this one after. So thank you. So where does the word mosque come from, and why in the UK are they called Islamic centers? I think mosque is basically an anglicized version of masjid. That's how I understand it. Maybe someone knows a bit more than me on that one. Okay, last point I think for today. Where comes the strange type of prayer in Islam? Good question. I think that's probably for another day. I don't have an easy answer to that. Did someone write them? Were they originally prayers created by people like Umar? Possibly. I don't know. Was there a history behind those? I have no idea. So I put my hand up and say I don't know. It'd be interesting, I suppose, to find out if there's any precursors for those prayers. I don't know what to say to that. Eastern Christians prostrated for prayer. Yeah. Just one other thing. Just say that AJ Juice paper that I've referenced there at the beginning has some great stuff in it. There's a few more videos coming along, and one of the key findings is that he found that the Qibla kept changing multiple times. So it's not as simple as we imagine. Okay, we got an answer to that mosque point. Bye to Linda. Mosque comes from the word mezquita in Spanish, and since there were so many and the Catholics didn't like them during the Reconquistas, they gave them the name for mosquitoes. Are you serious? Is that where it comes from? Mosque, mosquitoes. Wow. That's amazing. I never heard that. Okay, I think we'll give the last word to Odin. Strange type of prayer in Islam, Jewish tradition that get in Eastern Christianity, Judaism, Karaism, and Islam. Okay, so it comes from Judaism. Okay, be interesting to learn a bit more on that one. So listen, thanks a lot, everyone. We kept it reasonably short, an hour. Don't want to go on to 2 hours. Thanks, everyone. Over the next few weeks, I'll be releasing parts 2, 3, and 4 of my series on AJ Juice. But apart from that, I will see you in the autumn. So thank you for showing up. Talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.